So I would like to take you back in time. Look at it. It's before they had to change the scale on the y-axis of the temperature plots. You could buy a 9-inch Big Boon carbide cannon for just $4.40 or a new 6-shot revolver for $12.95. I think these guns are great, says Nellie Fox, Chicago White Sox star and American League MVP. Or, you could give your toddlers some guns after you hand-build this Playtime Prairie schooner. You need more ways to protect yourself. Why not try for $5.95 a fountain pen type pocket tear gas with 1 shell for police or civilian defense against robbers, mashers, etc. I also didn't know what a masher was, but a masher is like a fun, cute slang word for like a guy who follows you around and touches you without your consent, so...
It's getting so a girl can't travel alone without you riverboat mashers getting right.
I picked up this Popular Science June 1960, only 25 cents. I think I paid $2 for it at an antique mall. I love to buy these. I love old science things, trying to figure out like what science communication was like in the 60s. Very interesting to me. But this one in particular spoke to me because of the cover story, The Truth About Spark Plugs. What is the truth? I need to know. The Truth About Spark Plugs by Hubert Luckett. Spark plugs have been the subject of more pseudoscientific baffle-gabble misrepresentation and folklore than any other part of an automobile. Although spark plugs are basically simple devices, few mechanics and even fewer car owners have really understood the factors affecting their performance. They weren't alone. Even auto engineers have been mystified by certain quirks of spark plug behavior. And that is one of the things that is interesting to me about this article. Because in the year 2026, you don't actually need to know. Not anymore. You don't need to know what a spark plug is or how to change it or how to clean it. And I know my audience is mostly my age and older. I know you guys know what a spark plug is. I know in 1985 you had to clean your spark plugs, but now we are in 2026. Surely there is someone out there driving a 1971 Cadillac Eldorado and they change their spark plugs every year, but most of us, we don't ever have to think about it, ever. I feel so confident that the average adult in 2026 does not need to know what a spark plug is, that I feel to continue this video, I must first explain what a spark plug is. Something you absolutely would not have to do to talk to an adult in 1960 about spark plugs. They know what spark plugs are, but we don't, because we don't need to. That's an interesting thing. Combustion engines, like the ones in gasoline-powered cars, work to propel you in a direction via controlled explosion. The energy from the reciprocal motion of the piston is turned into rotational energy via the crankshaft, and your tires move. Explosion, piston, crankshaft, car go. I thought that I would highlight this for you. Discovery #mindblown model science kit. So, welcome to Angela's toy review. And this sells from anywhere between $30 and $50, but I got it at Savers for $4. I know the tag says $7.99, but it was Member Monday, so it was half off. So, love a deal. Love a thrift. Let me tell you, I would absolutely not pay more than $4 for this. I hated this toy. I don't understand who it's for. It says 8+. I don't know if I've met an 8-year-old who would want to do this. No, they would want to build an engine, but this specific kit is just smoosh these 2 plastic pieces together, screw in 6 tiny screws 25 times in a row. Like, you're not actually learning anything about engines. I'm not saying an 8-year-old couldn't do this. What I imagine happening is that your average 8-year-old would do like the bottom 2 and then get very bored and then have an adult finish it for them. And then what would happen is the adult would spend, you guys, this took me a solid 90 minutes. I'm not very mechanical. I'm a theorist. Leave me alone. But I followed the instructions, and I was also watching a YouTube video, so I was distracted. But it took me 90 minutes. Which I think is embarrassing, but I'm going to be honest about the toy. This is a toy review. And I gotta say, it's garbage. It doesn't work. After the adult puts it together, the kid would run over, you would plug it in, and nothing would happen, because nothing did happen when I first plugged mine in. I went back through it, I made sure I had followed all the instructions correctly, and it didn't work. And I read some of the reviews, and they recommended getting some cardboard and cutting some pieces to add to like smoosh things together better. So that's what I did. You can't see through it, but there's various places where I've added some cardboard, and yet still this thing doesn't run. If you install the little motor the way they want you to, you have to like shove it in to make it work, which is frustrating and not that exciting, because the second issue, even though this doesn't work, is that it says you can see through it and you just can't. Plastic is very dark. You can't see, like, there are these little pistons in here that move. I think I took a video of me turning the crankshaft manually before I put the rest of this on, so you can see the pistons moving in there. It's just, it's not very informative. And like, obviously I get that. Like, you can't make metal cut pieces at any reasonable price and also make it safe enough to hand an 8-year-old. So I understand why this is the way that it is, but there's also no educational material, which is my problem with a lot of STEAM toys. Like, yes, I followed the instructions and put all these pieces together, but nowhere did it tell me what each of these pieces was. It's just like, here's the timing belt, put it on. And what does it time? I would love to know. This needs to be included with like a 60-page color book where it shows me each piece in like plastic next to what a real engine piece looks like, and then tells me what it does. And this has none of that. If this had information, I would rank it much more highly, but as it is, it doesn't work as described and it teaches me nothing. 1 out of 10. I mean, don't buy this for your child. I feel like a kid that was super into engines might like it, and a particularly gritty 8-year-old could definitely follow the instructions and screw all the screws. But like, they wouldn't learn anything more about engines than they would from like following IKEA instructions and building like a credenza, right? It's just, there's no information in this. I feel like I should try to turn it on for you. Let me get it also has these stupid LEDs that like you can barely see and do nothing. If I would think like the energy from the motion of the pistons would power the LEDs, but it doesn't. Anyway. Ta-da! I feel like you can't see anything. You can see the fan turning, right? Though that's like the pistons move and it moves the fan. I would be so sad if I spent $40 on this. Just saying. So the tiny explosions move the piston. The crankshaft takes that motion, that energy, and makes the wheels turn. That's how cars work. Where does the spark plug come in? I have a spark plug here, but surely I will need to draw a nice little diagram to explain what a spark plug is. But according to its name, the spark plug makes the spark, right? It sparks the fuel, causing the explosion to move the piston, to give that energy to the crankshaft to move the tires. That's a spark plug. A spark plug is 2 electrodes separated by some insulating material. You will send current to this device, which will be blocked by the insulator, but once the voltage is high enough, the current will flow between the electrodes, making a little plasma spark in the spark gap. And then the gas surrounding the spark is ignited, and you get a little fireball, and the fireball ignites the rest of the fuel inside your piston, which causes the pressure to change and the piston to move. Internal combustion engines, like the one in gas-powered cars, are not just like constantly on fire the way an external combustion engine, like a steam engine, is. Like, to run a steam engine, you have like the guys with shovels constantly putting coal in to constantly heat this liquid. You know, in cars, You send a little bit of fuel into the piston. It's ignited. It moves the piston, which crankshaft wheels, right? But it's not constantly on fire. Your spark plugs end up being very important for things like fuel efficiency. You want to make sure when you put some fuel in that piston that you're using all of the fuel so that you're getting maximum energy from the amount of gas you put in. How you get the current into this thing is the battery of your car, which is one of the reasons why if your battery, I'm just going to hold that and stare at it, I'm sorry. So the battery sends the current to the spark plug to ignite the fuel, right? And that's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons, if your battery is dead, your car won't start. You need that current going to your spark plug to use the fuel that's in your car. So if your brain works like mine, you'll probably be like, oh, that makes sense. The car battery sends the current to the spark plug, ignites the fuel, car go. But surely cars have existed before car batteries have existed. So how would a car in like 1912 send current to their spark plugs? And there were a couple of options, but the most common is called an ignition magneto. You have some magnets that generate low voltage electricity, and then you have a transformer that takes that electricity and makes it high voltage, and then you send that high voltage to your spark plug. Ignition magneto. Obviously batteries are way better, so now we use that. But let us go back in time. Look at this gorilla. It's the first ever gorilla to be born in captivity, and honestly, it makes me sad. Someone tried to steal Lincoln's body. Someone is forging metals in a bucket. This guy is telling you to solder using a frying pan. And not once in this article did they say, and now you can never use this frying pan for food anymore. They just didn't say that. And my question is, were readers of Popular Science magazine in 1960 expected to be more intelligent than the average person now? Or did they just not care that now their readers might be eating lead? Like, are warnings more prevalent now because people are dumber or because people care more about the health and safety of others? I'm going to be honest, I think it's that people care more. People don't want the readers to be eating lead, but in this article, they never say. I feel like this article should be like, and now your cast iron pan is a garage cast iron pan and not a kitchen cast iron pan. You know what I mean? They don't say that. They just don't say that. They want you to solder in your kitchen, letting your children breathe in those fumes, and then fry an egg in that pan after. Why not? But I mean, maybe everyone in 1960 knew not to eat where they soldered. Maybe that was it. I don't know. I've been looking at a lot of sewing patterns lately, and one of like baby's basic first sewing pattern is an oven mitt. And all of the patterns say like, making something in the shape of an oven mitt does not make it oven safe. You need to have the correct material. And I don't know, maybe that's something good about the future. Anyway, there's a solar panel powered car in here. Imagine if that had taken off. Imagine if instead of 70 years of primarily gas powered cars, we had innovations in solar technology. That would have been cool. And lots of boats, lots of water sports, lots of water devices. People loved boats in 1960. From this magazine, like if I'm an anthropologist 80 years after this magazine is published, I am going to think that the average American loved to be in a boat. They loved a boat. They sure did love a boat, and also cigarettes and tobacco products. A lot of that. Let's get back to our article. Let us learn the truth about spark plugs. So the basic tone of this article is a discussion on all these different companies using advertising words to sell their spark plugs over other spark plugs. They talk about the materials and the oils used and the spark gap. Let me show you what a spark gap is. You see that little, I don't need to do this. I'm going to put a picture on the screen, but it's fine. You see that little gap between, that little gap will determine how much voltage is required to jump the gap and create a little plasma between the gap. The larger this gap, the higher the voltage that is required. And the smaller the gap, the lower voltage is required. But you want like a perfect Goldilocks zone, because if the voltage required is too low, you might not get it hot enough to use and burn all the fuel. If it's too high, you risk really increasing the temperature that this thing is subjected to, which could destroy it. And also, you're gonna misfire, which will cause the fuel to leave the piston without actually burning. So I mean, it's not that it's not important, but as this article teaches us, it's just that all of them are basically the same. I think it's a really interesting article, in part because this magazine also has ads for spark plugs making the claims that he calls bunk inside his article. So I just want to take you through some of this article because I think it's a really nice example of how to, without condescending, explain a science topic to people who are just surrounded in myths about that topic. As he says, all the pseudoscientific baffle-gabble, misrepresentation, and folklore. It's just really interesting to see him lay out, like, oh, you've heard all these myths, and here's why that's not true. The first thing he does is define the job of the spark plug, which is, to spark the fuel. And right away, he starts dispelling myths. He's like, you may have heard that a fatter, longer, or hotter spark will be better, more fuel efficient, but that's just not true. The thing you want to worry about is if the spark plug fails to light. If it fails to light, the fuel in your cylinder will not be burned up and that fuel is wasted. You're wasting money because the gas is leaving your tailpipe and not being used to propel your car. And then he moves forward to talk about another myth that I still see people, maybe not like falling for, people just assume that this is factual. When you look at the octane rating on gas, you see that as it increases, the price increases. And people think that, oh, that gas is fancy, so it must be better somehow. But that's not necessarily true. If you read your car manual, the engine that you have is tuned to a specific octane rating of gas, and that's what you will choose for your car. It's not necessarily like this one would be better or your car won't run better because you're using a different one. Your car will run better if you use the one that is specific for your car. As he says, higher octane gas is needed in some engines because of basic design characteristics, not because premium gas makes up for spark plug deficiencies. The latest in mail order magic can't change this, and calling a spark plug a fancy name doesn't change its function. Very funny. Again, there are ads for spark plugs in this same magazine that do these things he's calling annoying and bunk. I love it. And then right here, he lists some reasons why a plug might misfire if it doesn't get enough voltage, if the voltage gets sidetracked. And then he talks about how the chance of misfiring goes down if more molecules of gas reach temperature from the spark. I really like this picture in the top left showing the different ways the spark plugs can be damaged. It's kind of like what the spark plug is made of and the environment it's in. So in the 1960s, you're putting leaded gasoline in your car, and the lead from the gasoline can make little deposits all over the spark plug, causing it to corrode. Oil can do the same thing, or the material that the spark plug is made of will wear away in the environment that it's in because like the temperature is so high. So this is the things they talk about when they're like, oh, you need to clean your spark plugs to get the oil or the lead off. You need to re-gap them because maybe as the electrode wears away, the gap is getting bigger, which means a higher voltage is required to make the spark. And then, of course, eventually you have to replace them about every 20,000 to 30,000 miles. The other plot on this page is comparing hot spark plugs to cold spark plugs. They were just different types of spark plugs that worked at different temperatures. And this was, of course, sold as like, oh, you want to get a hot spark plug, it's better. Or, oh, you want a cold spark plug. But of course, as he details in the article, what you actually want is the spark plug that is suited to the way you're driving. Are you doing mostly highway miles? Are you doing mostly short trips around town? That will determine what the best spark plug is for you. Again, a thing we never have to think about in the year 2026. Moving on to the next page, we have a very informative graphic on how gasoline is wasted due to a spark plug misfiring because the fuel gets into the piston, the spark plug fires, it ignites the fuel, which propels you forward. And if your spark plug fails to ignite the fuel, that fuel gets pushed out of the piston and you don't get to use it for fuel anymore. So of course, when you have fewer spark plugs misfiring most of the time, you are getting much better fuel efficiency. And I'm not going to go over all of these diagrams. I just think they're so informative and useful. Just a perfect example of how you communicate what is important to a scientific idea to a reader. This one is showing how voltage can be diverted, preventing a spark from happening in your spark plug, kind of showing the importance of inspecting them and cleaning them. This next diagram shows 4 different types of spark plugs, how the kind of nose design changes and what claims the manufacturers of these designs are making. And this is one of the things he tests in his spark plug over 1 year test, but you can see that the positioning of the spark will change and the claims they're making, like, oh, this will last longer, this will work for higher temperatures. It's so useful to see it all laid out like this. And I can't imagine where else you would see this in 1960. Perhaps mechanics would have some sort of textbook that was explaining all these differences, but this was, again, companies producing products and being like, this is better. I know you have to buy this every 3 years, so you better buy ours. But what I think is so interesting about this article, that it is being presented in this manner of fact, like, here are the different types of spark plugs. Here is what the companies who produce these say, knowing you have to inspect these regularly and buy them every 2 to 3 years. And here's what we found. We went and talked to them. We looked at them. I tested them in my car. They're all kind of the same for daily driver usage. It's so good. It's such a good article. Bottom left here is a diagram showing how spark plugs will behave at different speeds and what happens when you like slam on your gas and how that can cause a misfire. Or if you have a plug that's starting to be faulty, why you would see it on the highway when you're suddenly going a lot faster than you regularly do. Very helpful, very interesting. Oh, and boats. More boats and intercom for when you're on your boat. Of course, that makes sense. And then the article pauses here the way it does in magazines. In magazines, you kind of have the big article and they'll give you like 3 pages and then it continued on page 86, and you'll have to scroll to find it, forcing you to look at all the ads in the magazine, which I'm sure I would have been annoyed in 1960 at all the ads, but as a future person who would now have to read something like this on the internet, I don't think it's that bad. At least these ads don't move. I struggle with that. Anyway, the article continues. Okay, so after many, many, many pages of other articles and ads, we finally get the continuation of our article. And right away, our author works to assure his readers that, like, hey, if you have a lead-fouled spark plug and you're not noticing the misfire, of course you didn't, because even trained observers can't spot it until it's happening 12% of the time. So when a spark plug is fully broken, you'll have a regular misfire that you can kind of hear and sense, like a car like kind of like jumping, and you'll have really bad fuel efficiency. But when you have a lead-fouled one, for example, where sometimes the spark plug is working and sometimes it's not, as it gets further and further corroded, you can't really miss, which of course relates back to this being a regular task that people in the 60s would just be doing all the time, just once every 6 months, peeking their head in their engine, looking at their spark plugs, cleaning them, regapping them, replacing them, right? One of the fixes that was suggested for this, that he is of course addressing as a myth, is that a phosphorus additive would prevent lead fouling. But as he says, the additive does not remove the deposits as the ads for that additive suggest. And I love it. I love it. The next myth he attacks is that having a wider plug gap will increase fuel economy by causing like a hotter burn. And of course, more ads, of course. He says the best way to get better fuel economy is to prevent random misfiring. And this is a thing that it doesn't happen as much anymore now that cars are just computers. Your computer is tracking what your spark plugs are doing, but that's not how it was in the 1960s, where you could expect the type of plugs that wear out after 30,000 miles are also going to have like factory defects that you're not going to be noticing, but you will get these random misfires. And the author is suggesting like, hey, the best way to get better fuel economy is not to check all your spark plugs and widen the gaps. Instead, it's to check all your spark plugs for cleanliness, to make sure they're not cracked, to make sure they're still working. The less misfirings you have, the better your fuel economy will be. And what he's referring to here is how manufacturers of spark plugs were offering these different designs, being like, oh, this one has a larger gap to have better fuel economy. And so, of course, our author goes and measures what the difference in voltage is with these like tiny changes in gap, and he finds no significant difference. I love this sentence. He says, theory aside, what counts is whether the surface discharge plugs perform the miracles claimed for them. I tried them in my own car for 5,000 miles, keeping careful records of fuel mileage and performance before, during, and after using them. The results: there was no difference in gasoline mileage. There was no difference in engine octane requirements. There was no difference in performance. I love it. I love a man who tests the theory and shows, actually, no, It doesn't matter. That's not what's important. Next, he tests those hot versus cold plugs, those that work better at different temperatures. And of course, he says, obviously the best choice is a plug that remains in the safe zone in the commonest type of service. Like, oh, use the one recommended by your manual. We end the article with, despite the best efforts of engineers, spark plugs still require regular attention. Electrodes wear away and harmful deposits accumulate on the insulator. Plugs must be cleaned every few thousand miles and electrodes filed and gapped. When the electrodes are too worn to obtain an efficient gap, you need new plugs. So the author goes through all these myths. He has these beautiful diagrams showing the difference in spark plug types. He has diagrams showing how speeding and accelerating affect voltage required for spark plugs. All of these bits of information that work to get to his main argument, which is you have to regularly clean and re-gap your spark plugs to make sure that they're in good working order, and you have to replace them when they are no longer working, which is how we would have started the article, right? He's saying don't fall for the flim-flam, don't fall for those advertising lies. This is the truth about spark plugs. You need to clean them, you need to re-gap them, and you need to replace them. And of course, that is not the truth for us because we don't need to do any of those things. So I bought a little thing. Let me grab it. This is a spark plug that's for like a 2006 Toyota Corolla. It's iridium. I have a spark plug tester that I want to show you. That's why I bought this. I think I mentioned somewhere in this video, I'm filming this after, that we had to replace a spark plug in our lawnmower, and it needs a copper one. So this is a copper one, but I'm going to save this in case we need to replace the spark plug. So you can plug this into where your spark plug goes, and you can test to see like if the little light bulb goes off and if your circuit is working. It will go off, and if it doesn't, you know there's an issue with your spark plug. But also there's this, which I saw on the internet, and I thought it would be fun to buy. What this does is just, it runs the spark plug. It puts a high voltage through it. I put my spark plug in. There's a little safety case. I'll put that on. And yeah, this produces a high voltage and it should spark it. Let's see if you can see it. I love the hum that high voltage things make for you. Oh yeah, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? I'll just film this on my phone. Great. So if you hear that noise, a high voltage thing is happening, right? But there's the little spark plug. It's working. So I think it would be fun to draw a plot of how much people need to care about spark plugs based on what year it is, right? It's 1890. Nobody has a car. Nobody cares. Nobody cares what a spark plug is. I know it's invented, but nobody cares. Of course, cars become more popular, but not everyone has a car yet, so the people with cars have to care. And then there's a point where everyone has a car. Spark plugs need to be cleaned and maintained. This is a task everyone would know how to do. You could tell your 8-year-old to go check your spark plugs, and that 8-year-old would know what to do, right? Here is a manual from a 1928 Chevy. A full 2 pages dedicated to the cleaning and polishing of your spark plugs. And then it's like 1955. The spark plugs last 20 to 30,000 miles. So you're probably checking your spark plugs for cleanliness every 6 months, and you're replacing them every 2 years. That is a task you would still do yourself, right? You're not going to go to the dealership every 6 months to have them check your spark plugs, right? If you can do it, you would just learn how to do it because of the frequency of the task. Here's an ad for a spark plug cleaner, which also appeared on the TV show Pawn Stars as like a very interesting relic of how people used to have to care about spark plugs, but they don't anymore because nobody knows what this device even is. So,
spark plug cleaner. Why would you clean a spark plug?
Because they're dirty or corroded, you just clean them. Why buy new ones when you can just clean the old ones?
They're like $6.
That's about where we are in the 60s. You have these spark plugs that last 20,000 to 30,000 miles, but you do have to clean them. You have to check on them. That's like a task you have to do. The average American in 1960 was driving like 8 to 10,000 miles a year. So we're talking they last for 3 years if you're nice to them. and clean them. That's pretty good. I got this data on how many miles the average American car drives per year from the Department of Transportation website. They just have like a PDF and you can get the numbers. And I made this chart and I saw this dip. You see the dip? It's quite an obvious dip. And I was sure that I had typed something incorrectly. I went back to the PDF, I checked my numbers and they were correct, and I look at the plot again and I'm like, that's World War II. Obviously people weren't driving as much in World War II. This is my issue. I think in numbers and trends, and I don't think about history. Obviously when you're looking at a plot like this, you wouldn't say that's wrong. You would say, what happened in 1944? So anyway, you're a family in 1955 and you drive a Chevy. This is what your Chevy tells you about spark plugs. Keep the spark plugs clean. Remove and inspect every 5,000 miles and re-gap or replace as necessary. And they tell you what the gap should be so you can check it, and you could also buy the correct spark plug. So this is a device to measure a gap in a spark plug. I'm obviously just going to put a picture on the screen, but you can see that little gap. And you can measure your gap using a tool like this. Very cool. See? And your car manual will specify a specific gap. And then it's like the 80s, the 90s. So while these things were made of the same materials as they were in the 60s, in the 70s, like they reshaped them, which led to less misfiring and more reliable spark plugs, and people didn't have to replace their catalytic converters all the time. And you know, pollution went down. Great. You only need to change these every 20,000 to 30,000 miles. This is a once every 3-year task. You probably don't need to know how to do it anymore. There's going to be like one person in your family who knows how to do it. And every 3 years you'll call Aunt Carol and she'll be like, oh, it's really easy. You just get the right thing and you take it out and you twist it back in. It's so fine.
Whoa. Remember, spark plugs come out with a simple twist and pull. Twist and pull. Give it a try.
And then in the 90s, you guys, it's just that there's been so much advancement in like this stupid little spark plug technology that like, it's really interesting. This is a not complicated in any way device, but in the 90s, instead of making them with copper, they make them with iridium and like tungsten and stuff. You have computer machining devices that can make really specific shapes on, on the end of your spark plug. And in the 90s, spark plugs go from lasting 20,000 to 30,000. You should probably clean them, check it out, to spark plugs last 100,000 miles. You don't do anything. You don't need to touch them. Your mechanic might look at it, but like, you don't need to worry about it at all. 100,000 miles. I don't think I've ever had a car hit 100,000 miles. I hate driving. I don't want to do it.
Oh, yes, of course, we acquire a new skill, but aren't we taking a job away from a qualified mechanic?
Someone who may have a family to support. Not to mention all the merchants who depend on his disposable income for their livelihood.
Yes, the human toll begins to mount.
Car owners now don't have to, they don't even have to think about spark plugs. It's a once every 100,000 miles. Okay, I read some car manuals that still say, like modern cars that say you should replace them every 60,000 miles. But again, on average, Americans are driving, well, now it's like 10 to 12,000 miles a year. That's every 5 years. That's a mechanic's job. That's not your job. That's why you know an expert. They're the expert. You go pay them to look at the spark plugs every 7 years, you know? I know I'm going to be making one guy who owns a small engine repair company very angry when I say we don't need to know about spark plugs. I think it's really interesting how this used to be a thing everyone had to care about. And now, because of improvements in technology, we just don't. Here's what my car manual says about spark plugs. It's just like, only use iridium spark plugs. Here's the gap. Assuming that a mechanic would check this manual and do it for me, right? That's what I get from this. There's no information about me cleaning them or polishing them or regapping them. I mean, partly because you can buy a set of spark plugs for under $100, but also because you only need to do it every 10 years. It's just not that big of a deal. And as I said, you should check your car manual. Mine says 100,000 miles. And I have seen some that say every 60,000 miles. I don't want this video to be about car maintenance, obviously. I want this video instead to be about this 85-plus-year-old article and how it's interesting how this amount of information would have been common knowledge, and it's not anymore. And that's kind of a shame because I've been learning a lot about spark plugs for this video, and they're really interesting now that cars are just computers. They use these to track the fraction of ionized gas in each piston, which your car computer will use to inform how much gas to put in each piston. It's so interesting. But look at our plot again. Everyone cares about spark plugs and nobody cares about spark plugs because they don't have to. I think this is really interesting. I really like it. Every single video and article I have read about the timeline of spark plugs has mentioned or ended with like a very nice finale moment where it's like electricity led to the advent of spark plugs, which leads to car culture. Net negative. But electricity is replacing cars now. Battery-powered cars are the future. Spark plugs will go away. Spark plugs, we no longer think about them, but soon we won't even have them. Electric cars don't have spark plugs because you don't have fuel to ignite because it's a battery powered. So, yeah. It's quite a cute story. I really like the spark plug story. I think it's interesting. And I feel like people are going to be so mad at me. Like, of course you have to be interested in car maintenance. How dare you drive a car and not know how to change a spark plug? It's very simple. And obviously people who want to know about spark plugs still can. Like, you can still open your engine and find the little top and take it off and unscrew it and look down there and see a spark plug. You know, you can do it if you want. It's just like once every 10 years, it's not a thing you have to do. I have a very visceral memory from like 1993 or 1994 when I was like 4, a small child. And it was like a holiday, so we were with family, and I was bragging, like a small child would, about learning how to dial a phone, like to call 911 in preschool. Like, they taught us that. They placed me in front of this rotary phone, and I didn't know how to use it. Like, that's just not a skill a 4-year-old in 1994 would have, right? Obviously, a 4-year-old in like 1958 would know how to use a rotary phone. I had never seen one before. I had no idea. So I picked up like the receiver and I didn't know what to do, and I just hung it back up, and I just like was really embarrassed, and I cried, and everyone laughed. Like, there is going to be a group of people who are like, no, we absolutely need to know about spark plugs. How dare you? The children must learn cursive. I think it's interesting that innovations have made it so we don't have to care. Maybe I would change one if it came up. Like, we did that in our lawnmower, which uses carbon spark plugs still, which I guess makes sense because you're not driving 30,000 miles on a lawnmower. I guess that's just part of society, like an older generation being like, how dare you say you don't need to clean spark plugs? I think the modern equivalent might be me, like someone my age forcing my children to learn how to pump gas as if gasoline cars would exist in the future, because they wouldn't. It doesn't make sense to buy a gasoline car. And I actually deeply regret my last car purchase. You know, when your car suddenly breaks and you just have to buy something? Like, I just didn't think about it. I just got the loan and I bought a hybrid thinking like, oh, this will be better, but I should have gotten an electric car. I should sell my car and get an electric car. It's just that I didn't think about it at the time. But yeah, my children don't need to learn how to pump gas. I don't need to know how to use a rotary phone. And all of us for the future, like, unless we use small combustion engines, don't really need to know about spark plugs. But it's a fun little thing that we all had to know at one point. That's interesting. I like that a lot. Anyway, kids these days, they don't even ride their bikes anymore, right? Am I right? Am I right? That's just like the next article. Sorry. Okay. The next article in this magazine is about bikes, which I love. Bike's good. There's a guy who would absolutely have a heart attack if he saw kids today because he's only complaining that kids these days in 1960 don't get enough exercise. I'd like to point out my favorite part of this article. In gathering material for this article, technical editor Hubert Luckett talked to engineers at major auto spark plug and oil companies, observed laboratory tests, studied dozens of technical papers from industry and government, analyzed reports from independent testing organizations, and managed to get access to some confidential reports at 2 major automotive companies. To supplement this with first-hand experience, he ran a little test program of his own. For a year, he used a variety of plugs in his own car, keeping careful records. Performance was monitored periodically with an oscilloscope ignition analyzer rigged to operate while the car was on the road. Popular Science in 1959 paid Hubert Luckett for a year of investigative reporting on spark plugs, where he went to factories, he studied papers, he got government records, he did his own test in his car. This is the state of media in 1960. They paid a man a year to write, like, good. It's a great article. The graphics are fantastic. I like it a lot. We don't have this anymore. Every time I see one of these, I'm so impressed with the volume of interesting articles on so many topics. There's stuff in this magazine about cars, about rockets, about the stuff NASA is doing in 1960s. It has people doing metalworks and soldering. It has plans to build little things, to like little science-y tricks to improve people's lives, or even like toys for children. There's one for a picnic basket, very cute. There's a little pull-out book. Do you see this? A pull-out book on choosing 3 basic hand tools, like for homeowners. So you could just take this to your local hardware store and pick the hammer for the job. Like, this is so informative and well done and well researched. And this magazine doesn't exist anymore. If you go to the website, they still have a website, but it's just, it doesn't exist anymore. The modern equivalent of The Truth About Spark Plugs by Herbert Luckett is a Technology Connection video, which is fantastic, and I love those videos. But like, media used to exist. I think it's really sad. Like, there's no version of Popular Science magazine that Angela Collier 80 years from now could go find in an antique store, because like print media doesn't exist. Magazines like functionally don't exist. The media is owned by evil billionaires. Like, you could never in 2026 read an article about spark plugs and trust that the information was being given to you by some impartial guy who tested them over a year. That doesn't exist. You have to go to like forums or, you know, YouTube videos of someone you trust who's not also taking money from spark plug people, right? It's devastating. There's nothing that's like Popular Science. There's nothing that's like this today. I did find that this magazine has been scanned and placed on Google Books, you know, so I'll link it below. I will say, it's not all good. Not a single person of color in this entire magazine, which is crazy for 1960. There's also some real weird stuff about women. Let me read you an example. Machine Written Magazine. American chemists are now picking out of their mailboxes the first magazine to be prepared cover to cover by an electronic computer. The machine-made editorial matter is not exactly lurid. The magazine is called Chemical Titles, and that's precisely what it contains. 104 pages of titles of articles on chemistry selected from 550 journals and arranged alphabetically by keywords. So the idea is, because like computers didn't exist, computer search didn't exist in the way it does now, the internet didn't exist, you would get physical copies of journals, which are huge. Let me show you one. This. Do you see this? This is Nature, July to December 1932, and it's huge. So in the olden days, the articles would be published in these big volumes, which would be mailed to usually libraries. And if you wanted to read an article, you would have to scan this whole business, unless you knew of it from like a talk or something that you had seen in person. And yeah, so so the big science news in 1960 was that this journal would be just a list of articles with keywords, so you could scan that and know where to go in the giant books, right? But let me keep reading. Only an automatic computer could prepare the new chemical titles fast enough to make it worth publishing. The IBM 704 takes a little less than 12 minutes to edit an entire issue. Printing takes another 18 to 20 hours. The magazine gets to the reader no later than 3 weeks after journals and indexes would have arrived, assuming any reader would subscribe to all 550 journals. And here we go. With a computer to do the brain work, the job is easy. As the articles are selected, girls at the American Chemical Society office record the titles and authors on punch cards. Then the machinery takes over. See, in 1960, you could just say, the girls did what? They scanned the articles, knowing which were important, knowing their keywords, and then they typed up punch cards, which is, computer programming. But the machinery did all the work. The machinery alphabetized the information. The chemists, if they can read articles enough to categorize them by subject and title and interest, they also understand chemistry. I don't like that. Even the bucket guy, he's like, I forge metal in a bucket using my wife's vacuum. And it's like, babe, that's y'all's vacuum. You don't vacuum? It's hers? I don't think she likes to. You got a vacuum, man. That sucks. There's one in here called How I Got My Wife to Use a Seatbelt. She is the most stubborn person and uses all kinds of excuses for not doing so. And the article includes his little design for a buzzer, probably very close to how seatbelt buzzers work now. He made a little circuit, right? So he starts the ignition. If she sits on the seat, a circuit is completed, which causes a buzzer to go off, and the buzzing won't stop until she clicks her seatbelt. So I guess this one's fine. Like, if my dumb wife wouldn't wear a seatbelt, I would also make fun of her in a newspaper. You gotta wear seatbelts. I feel like that one I stand by, but the rest, we're not calling chemists girls, man. I don't like that.